So who are we thinking about? Well, this time of year, the students start coming back. So a lot of people who are over 18, and I'll mention about children in a second, but those who perhaps in their early 20s, late teens, who have been studying, who have got back over to university, they want to come home. Well, when they do come home, they will have to isolate for 2 weeks, which is obviously a significant impact.
That was Bailiwick reporter Julian Morell, and this is the Bailiwick Podcast with me, James Filial. So, England will soon be, once again, simply red, as will Scotland. It seems this week was a severe case of back to the future for our COVID restrictions. Who would have thought it? A highly contagious virus returns once people start travelling and mixing again. In a nutshell, it means an even harder push for people to be vaccinated, as that cuts your isolation when travelling from a red zone, i.e. the whole of England and Scotland from the 29th of June. It cuts that isolation to less than a day. But that's cold comfort to either those who oppose the jab or simply for the many in the younger age bands who haven't been offered both jabs. The programme, remember, quick though it is, doesn't complete until August. We're back to a time of weekly changes in the rules by which we are supposed to live our lives. To help make sense of those for you, here's our reporter on the pod this week, Julian Morell. Julian, what exactly was changed this week?
So there were two elements to the announcement this week. One was about travel, and the second one was about reconnection. So if we look at travel first of all, which was probably the most significant of the changes, the government yesterday announced that from a week on Tuesday, that's the 29th of June, England as a nation will be reclassified as red in its entirety. And this is in response to rising numbers of the Delta variant, both in England primarily, but also in Jersey. So before we had this, the classification was broken down into regions or what they call local tier authorities in England. But now the whole of England will be classified as red, joining Scotland as red, while Wales and Northern Ireland remain green. And that's from a week on Tuesday.
So what's been the reaction to that so far? Because that's going to affect people, obviously, who are wanting to travel, because although it's a small change, it's quite an important change, isn't it, in what people can and can't do?
Well, the reaction from industry, the people that we've spoken to, there was a sense of inevitability, really. You only see the news, the national news, to see the spread and the impact of the Delta variant. Inevitability, of course, it does affect people. What it does, who it primarily affects are those who haven't been double jabbed. So at the moment, and under the new rules, if you have been double jabbed and arrive even from a red zone, so that will be the whole of England from a week on Tuesday, you only have to isolate until your first negative test. However, if you haven't had those tests, and here we're talking primarily about young people, they will be impacted. They will have to isolate when they arrive in Jersey for 10 days. So who are we thinking about? Well, this time of year, the students start coming back. So a lot of people who are over 18, and I'll mention about children in a second, but those who perhaps in their early 20s, late teens, who have been studying, who have got back over to university, they want to come home. Well, when they do come home, they will have to isolate for 2 weeks, which is obviously a significant impact, particularly if they want to start work over in the summer. So perhaps that'll be a time to do your dissertation, to do your summer studies, and then escape. For children under 18, there was an announcement made yesterday in relation to them. So from a week on Tuesday, the same time that England turns red in its entirety, children under the age of 18 will be classed as green arrivals, regardless of their parents' vaccination status or their 14-day travel history. So this is in response to feedback, because what was happening when the emergency brake system came in and the rules were relaxed for people who had been double jabbed. A family of four go away to a red country. They came back to the island under the current rules. Under those rules, parents who have been double jabbed, well, they just needed to wait maybe 8 hours until they had their first negative test result, and they were free to go. But their children, because they had come from a red country and weren't double jabbed, well, they had to isolate for 10 days. So this made family life increasingly difficult, nigh impossible. So the government have responded to that. So all children regarded as green arrivals. And also, as an addendum to that, children aged 11 to 17 will now be required to complete a pre-departure travel form and undertake a PCR test upon arrival and on day 8, and must isolate until they receive their first negative test result. Children under 10 not required to do so.
But for the lower age brackets of people in Jersey, it's quite harsh, isn't it? Because some of them obviously won't have even been offered a jab yet. They won't have had the possibility of having their 2 jabs under the standard system.
Yes, it will affect people, and what the government say is, we've, as it's said throughout this COVID pandemic, we have to strike a balance. So what they've done is they've obviously tightened the rules, particularly for those who haven't had a jab. They've tightened the rules in response to the Delta variant. However, they do say that this week and a half really delay in bringing it in allows people to respond. So perhaps students may change their travel plans, and if their studies are close to being finished, or if they were hanging around in the UK for whatever reason after finishing, they may decide to bring their plans forward and come back before the whole of England turns red a week on Tuesday. I did mention, of course, there were 2 parts. It's about travel, and it's also about the reconnection plans. I think it's important I just mention that from this Tuesday coming, there was plans to lift the stage 7, which was effectively 3 things. These were the last of the reconnection plans. This is effectively getting a drink from the bar, or standing up and getting a drink from the bar, not having to get a drink ordered from a table in a pub. Nightclubs and the ability to dance. And lastly, there was a restriction on the number of people that you could have in a private, unregulated setting, so primarily private houses and gardens. That limit was set at 20 and was due to be lifted next week, having already been delayed a week. That's been pushed back again by another 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, until the 5th of July. So again, in response to the rising cases of the Delta variant, and in the acknowledged elevated transmissibility in places like nightclubs and standing at a bar, the government, following the UK, have pushed that back.
That's only going to go one way, right? I mean, we're at the beginning of this Delta variant curve. There are going to be more and more cases. Do you get the sense that reopening for standing at the bar and nightclubs, basically, is that just going to get pushed back through the summer now?
It may well be. That's a distinct possibility. The government, it's almost it's a mixed message in some respects. It's a message that we are open for business, and only this week a number of airlines, including Wizz Air and EasyJet, have said they're either introducing new routes or expanding their route network to Jersey. Jersey wants to appear to the outside world that it's open for business and come and stay, but it has to respond to this variant, and you get the impression that they're certainly putting weight into the vaccination, which they said that was always going to be our exit strategy, was the number of people vaccinated. So if you do have your 2 jabs and 2 weeks beyond that second jab, then it does seem that you are freer. It does raise the issue of at the beginning there was a lot of talk about the ethics behind compulsive vaccination, and the government always said that was never going to be the case. It'd always be, you would never have to be vaccinated, but from a practical point of view, it certainly seems to increasingly that having those 2 jabs will make your life, certainly outside of the island, that much easier.
Let's cover then this emergency brake issue, though, because I think it is confusing for people that it came in a few weeks back and we had these emergency brakes in relation to the Delta variant, and I think at the time there was the suggestion that actually they wouldn't all be applied in short order. And then sure enough, over the last few weeks, we've had more and more brakes until we finally get to this stage a week on Tuesday when actually there's just a brake applied to the whole country. So going to this issue of emergency brakes, what's actually happened there?
Well, they were brought in response to the rise in the Delta variant in the UK, when it became very clear that some areas, initially only a small number, I think it was 9 or 11, a small number of what they call the lower tier local authorities in England were showing increase in the Delta variant. So they were introduced a few weeks ago, but it was as the Delta variant spread, it became the number of emergency brakes increased, but also generally from travellers, the feedback I think to government was this is really complex. The UK has, I think it's over 200 either local councils or lower tier authorities. So the map was very detailed. It was very complex. And so the government have said we're doing away with that. That's why they're introducing the national classification system a week on Tuesday. However, the Delta variant isn't going to take a pause between now and then. So they've introduced what they say is the last cycle of the emergency brake system and introducing 49 additional emergency brake areas from this coming Tuesday, just to cover the week before the reclassification. So I think they have responded to feedback, but as I say, trying to get the complexity out of the system and introduce a level of simplicity with national classifications. I think for anyone travelling the next week, there'll be a lot of red areas that they have to avoid. It could be quite complicated, but it will be simpler afterwards, although, as we've mentioned, it will have a significant impact for people who haven't been double vaccinated and have that 2-week period afterwards.
What's the message being sent out at the moment, do you think, to our biggest market, the UK? I mean, does Jersey want UK travellers or not?
I think it certainly wants them. It seems to be, we want you if you've had your 2 jabs. If you have your 2 jabs, you can come. It's increasingly complicated for those who haven't, and of course a number of islanders who want to come back to the island have not had their 2 jabs, particularly among the young. So it is a bit of a mixed message, but I think Jersey increasingly is becoming seeing itself as a safe place for double jabbers.
Okay, let's move on finally just to one related topic, which is contact tracing and direct contacts. Was anything announced on that yesterday? It's becoming more of an issue now as more cases obviously come up in Jersey. More people get designated as a contact, and therefore more people have to isolate. So in some ways it affects more people than the virus itself, or suffering from the virus itself. So was anything changed on that this week, or is that still to come?
It's still to come. It was highlighted the disparity in some ways between people who can come to the island with their double jabs and not have to isolate, or at least isolate only until their first negative test. However, direct contact tracing doesn't make that distinction. So if you are a direct contact, you have to isolate whether you've had your jab or not. So what the government have said is, yes, we do understand that this can't continue. There's almost 1,000 people now who are direct contacts in the island who have to work from home, or they have to stay at home if they're at school. So it is impacting a lot of people, and that's only set to rise. So what the government have said is we're talking about it. I understand that. STAC, the scientific advisors who speak to the government and advise them, are meeting early next week to come up with effectively a reclassification for direct contacts. That could involve a reduction in the isolation time, if there is indeed an isolation time for people who have been double vaccinated. But the details haven't been announced yet. We'll be expecting those next week, possibly mid next week, once the scientific advisors have agreed it, and what we call the competent authority ministers, the ministers who decide the COVID-related restrictions, and once they've decided and approved or amended whatever STAC suggests. It's important to say that, and government are stressing this, that there are no regulatory bodies in Europe or in the UK who have actually provided an authoritative guide on what should happen to double vaccinated people if they are direct contacts. So in some ways, Jersey is a bit of a spearhead for this. It's not been done before. So I think they have to think carefully. But I think there is a common sense view. Why should I have to isolate when I've been double jabbed and I've been told that I have a high level of immunity to the disease? Of course, people can still carry it with their double jabs, but there does seem to be a disparity between travel, the rules for travellers and for the rules for islanders caught in as direct contacts.
That was Bailiwick reporter Julian Morell. Thanks for listening to the Bailiwick podcast. The music you can hear incidentally at the beginning and the end of it is I Shift My Weight by Luno. You can find us in all of your usual pod platforms, and I know it's tiresome, but please do like and share this pod wherever you find it. It really does help. More on the pod next week. Thanks for listening.